All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to talk to you today. Hope you will call me and talk to me as well. The phone number it's a little small. It's on that slide I put there at the bottom right of your screen as you're looking at it. The Halitics slide, 240-242-5646. Give me a call. I'd love to talk to you. And no, Nikki Haley hasn't won the Republican primary in New Hampshire. I did have that kind of tongue-in-cheek headline, Haley beats Trump. She did beat him in Dixville Notch, where they have the earliest voting in the nation for presidential elections. That is, of course, excepting the Iowa caucuses, the earliest primary voting just at midnight East Coast time. And apparently all 6 registered voters in Dixville Notch had voted by 12:10 this morning, and all 6 had voted by 10 after, that is, for Nikki Haley. I was a little surprised when I saw this headline. I have to say, no, I wasn't surprised that Nikki Haley had won Dixville Notch. Maybe a little bit. I guess my assumption would be Trump probably would have won, although he didn't win there, and I didn't know this. I frankly don't keep track of how Dixville Notch votes. I know there are political junkies, I'm sure, who are very, keen on that, and it has been known as a bellwether in the past. But no, I don't really keep track of that whatsoever. But what really surprised me, not again who won, but the fact that it was reported at all. I thought there was, and you can help me with this, folks, I thought there was some kind of a news blackout, some kind of, maybe it was a law, a statute, something, guideline, that media was not supposed to report any results in an election until that particular state, that particular jurisdiction, whether it's a city, whether it's a county, what have you, until all the polling places are closed in that particular jurisdiction. So states like Florida, for example, which are include two different time zones, people who may have found in Miami have had the polls closed for an hour, don't hear the results of their state until the polls in Pensacola close, and that's Central time zone. So I would have assumed there'd be a news embargo, a news blackout. You wouldn't know how people voted in Dixville Notch until 6, 7, whatever, 8 o'clock tonight, I guess, when the polls close throughout New Hampshire. But I should have known better, because I think this is a standard. It's standard that the media reports what happened in Dixville Notch long before any polls have closed across the country. So that sort of surprised me a little bit. I guess they closed in Dixville Notch, but otherwise they're still open. And I do think, honestly, it's bad form. And I get why they do it. It's a news story and it's interesting. And hey, it's this like little town every 4 years makes the media, a town with like less than 10 voters. And their group of voters is actually higher this year, 6 versus 4 in 2020. But it does seem to me it could possibly throw the election a little bit. I mean, any results at all do have some impact, I think, on voters. So if voters read, oh, look, Dixville Notch went overwhelmingly 100% for Haley, could that possibly impact on voters in other parts of New Hampshire? I don't know, but it seems to me that the general guideline that the media, and I looked this up in some countries, in Canada, for example, in Ontario anyway, I don't believe the Ontario News can report the results of any election in Ontario until the polls have closed everywhere. So even if accounts are going on and they know that, in, say, I don't know, in Toronto, there's been clearly a big surge in support of a particular candidate, they can't report it until all the polls have closed in that province. So I think that's the better rule. I think American media has followed that guideline. They don't report until all the polls are closed, but they don't have to. That's not a law. And I looked this up. I tried to figure this out, and I couldn't find any particular national or state law that says you can't report until all the polls in your jurisdiction are closed. So I thought this was interesting. I don't know that it's going to be meaningful. And I really haven't been following the Republican primary much. We talked about the caucuses where Trump won a majority. It wasn't a huge blowout. I think he was up in the polls by somewhere around 60%, and yet only won Iowa by a little over, with a little over 50% of the vote. That did cause everyone but Nikki Haley to drop out, and now it looks like she may be facing her last rodeo this year. But just before we get to what the polls showed, the closing polls, we can just look briefly at what the results have been, and how does Dixville Notch? As Dixville Notch goes, so goes the nation. Apparently, that had previously been the case, and this is why I think it is somewhat problematic. I like your thoughts. Should the media report any polls, any official polls, or any exit polls? Should those all be embargoed until the results, until the polls are closed in the state? Maybe you think there shouldn't be any results reported whatsoever until all polls have closed, which would mean, say, in a presidential race, no one would know how New York State went. I mean, I think we could guess, given it's been a very deep blue state for a while. No one would know how Florida went. No one would know how New Hampshire went until Alaska and Hawaii were closed. And maybe that's the way to go. I mean, I know there's a lot of fear that when results are posted from East Coast states, that may tamp down the turnout in West Coast states. And there seems, it seems to make sense, right? Why would I go vote if I really only care a lot about the presidential race and I'm in California? Maybe I won't vote in a congressional race if I already know that Joe Biden is going to win, or already know that Hillary Clinton has lost, or already know that Barack Obama has been reelected. So I'm not going to vote. It's just not worth it. I'd have to take time off work. And if I was going to be voting the presidential election and I thought it was meaningful, I'd do it. So maybe the rule should be that there's no reports from any news outlets until all the polls for any election have been closed. I would like your thoughts, actually. 240-242-5646. I mean, it would make our election nights a lot less exciting and a lot more stressful because we'd all be going to bed. We'd have no idea. Or would we? I guess if you go to bed, well, Hawaii is 6 hours later. Is it 6, 7? 6 hours later, I guess, than the East Coast. So maybe around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, we might start to find out. But I don't know when they close in Nome. I don't know when polls close in the Aleutian Islands. They may close even later than that. Dixville Notch, once heralded as a near magic bellwether from 1968 to 2012, the winner of its primary, and that's 5, 6, 10 voters, won the party's nomination every cycle from 1968 to 2012. So from Richard Nixon in 1968 to Mitt Romney in 2012, every Republican winner. And I think they only have Republican voters. I don't think you get to live there if you're a Democrat. No, that's not true. Of course you could, but don't for whatever reason. But that changed when Kasich, John Kasich, and wasn't he still alive for a while against Trump, went longer than a lot of other candidates in 2016 versus. So it's interesting. But again, my main concern here is the media reporting results when all the polls haven't closed. Look, I'm glad we learn election night. I'm glad we can watch John King with his, on that board that he uses where he touch taps it, and then different counties pop up and they turn red and then blue and we see the path to victory. I don't know. I find that, it's entertaining. I'm glad we have it. I don't know if it's great for democracy. I really am not persuaded of that. But if you'd like to tell me what you think, 240-242-5646. And again, don't forget to click like. Don't forget to click subscribe. I'm going to see if I can give you my little, and I've had a little bit of tech issues working. I know Arlen said if there's tech problems, it's got to be Halitics. Yeah, I don't think that was really fair, maybe, but okay. But yeah, so we'll get that little subscribe button go. There it is. I just saw it. I'm real happy about that. And yeah, if you can subscribe, be real happy to see that. The New York Times or NPR maybe did interview a few of the voters, and I thought this was actually instructive. One of the Haley voters, one of the voters who all voted for Haley, Les Otten, a real estate developer who owns the Balsams. He's sick and tired of the negative and pessimistic politics. He says, everything's going great. We're the strongest economy in the world. Why should anybody be scared of it? Well, this to me does reflect clearly both who the Nikki Haley voters are, who Joe Biden wishes he had as a voter, and why Donald Trump could definitely win. And this is a guy who's incredibly privileged. He's elite. He is a real estate developer. He owns the Balsams. And I looked at him. I mean, the Balsams could be like a nothing burger, right? It could just be like a little, something that nobody really, like a few acres of wasteland. So I decided I wanted to go check that out and say, well, is it? What does this guy have? How affluent is he? And basically, he's kind of like, I guess, New Hampshire's answer to Trump. Trump's a big real estate developer and has all these resorts, the different Trump resorts, etc. That's a guy you'd think, well, maybe he would feel an affinity with Trump because clearly they have some similarities. But this is from the website of the Balsams. And I think there's a little bit maybe of like, padding or boosting, whatever, where, you puffery. But on that property, there's this beautiful resort. And they're kind of converting it into condos. Apparently, it's too expensive to run it as a destination resort. Instead, they want to have people move in there buy, apartments and separate condos. And there's golf, there's skiing. This guy's a one percenter. He's elite. So, of course, he's going to support a corporatist. It's no surprise. Anyone should say, of course, but no surprise he supports a corporatist like Nikki Haley. This is the kind of voter that Chuck Schumer certainly talked about appealing to back in 2016 about how they could lose for every working voter we lose in Erie, we can get two suburban voters outside of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and you can duplicate that on in Cleveland and Indianapolis. And it didn't work out because the bottom line is there are a lot more people who clean that resort, who work to maintain the property, than people who own the property. There are even more people who are, say, taking care of the pool than there are lawyers who are making sure that all the sales documents are properly drawn up. Although today there are so many lawyers, who's to say? Maybe there are more lawyers than there are maintenance people. But this is why Trump wins, because so many candidates like Nikki Haley, like Hillary Clinton, like Joe Biden, appeal to the ownership class. And it's ironic because, of course, Trump is one of the wealthy, not a billionaire perhaps, and not one of the wealthiest Americans anymore, according to Forbes, but still obviously affluent to the manner born and extraordinarily privileged and fortunate. But it's the state of our politics today that parties can, in general, muster up candidates in election after election like a Mitt Romney, like a John Kasich, who was was it Goldman Sachs? No, JP Morgan, right? And he's considered sort of a man of the people. It was a JP Morgan banker back in 2016. These are who, who had connections or has connections, pretty deep connections to Goldman Sachs. Ted Cruz. I think his wife worked there. Hillary Clinton gets her speeches there, paid $600,000 a speech or whatever it is. That's why Trump is able to win these elections. Because the people he's running against are so obviously, evidently corrupt. People are sick of it. We're disgusted by that. We know they're not on our side. We can't bribe them. They're not on our side. And so we're looking for anything better. This is why people like Marianne Williamson, I mean, she's a kook. I heard this. I was watching Breonna Joy Gray yesterday with Nathan Robinson, and they were saying, oh, yeah, you got to vote for Marianne Robinson. And, but some people think she's a kook. She is. She's got her crystals, and she's got this sort of weird self-help nonsense that appeals to people in rough times when you don't have an allied government, when you're truly on your own. It's no wonder that someone like a Marianne Williamson would be appealing, but it's irresponsible for Nathan Robinson and Breonna Joy Gray, to whom I have looked in the past for guidance, for suggestions, for advice, for intelligence, for wisdom, to recommend a warmonger like Marianne Williamson, someone who supports Joe Biden's policies in Ukraine that have been disastrous, costly, destructive, and even worse is supporting Israel. Now believes we have to maintain our support for Israel as she lashes out violently, genocidally in Gaza. Somebody who told me personally, yes, you have to support Joe Biden against a Trump, as though there was some, special sauce that Joe Biden had that would make things magically better. So this is not somebody that we should support, but because we are confronted with candidates so clearly unconcerned with us, Jimmy calls them sociopaths, right? Because they are unconcerned with the deaths that result from war. They're unconcerned with torture. They're unconcerned with the activities of our allies. And maybe he's right. Maybe they're sociopaths. I don't know if I'm going to use that term, but they're clearly not on the side of poor, struggling, and working people. Shade says, I care most about the environment. I care an awful lot about the environment. These are candidates these are politicians. These are leaders like Joe Biden who greenlight carbon bombs, who are all in for LNG. Trump's even worse. So it's understandable that phonies and charlatans like RFK Jr. are also garnering a lot of support. All I can do is tell you that I believe that the candidate right now who's most deserving of our vote is Jill Stein. I did like Cornel West, and in some ways still do, but Breonna Joy Gray did get it right yesterday when she said he's very poorly organized, he doesn't know how to run a campaign, and he's made some very poor decisions. Regardless, candidates who get the support of people like Jamie Dimon, the billionaire fraudster from JP Morgan Chase, or this developer Les Otten of the Balsams, they're not my candidates. 240-242-5646. Primary day in New Hampshire. So should Trump be worried? Because after all, Nikki Haley did win Dixville Notch. Should you be pleased that Nikki Haley, if you really can't stand Trump, if you think Trump is the Antichrist, I know Arlen wants Nikki Haley to win. And we'll find out in a little bit whether that's what the Democratic establishment, the Democratic elites want. I would say right now, Trump is probably resting relatively comfortably looking at these polls where you've seen the movement towards him. And he got all those endorsements from DeSantis, from Ramaswamy, and Christie, I think, but they all endorse him. So the latest polls show that from the 16th to the 19th in CNN, Trump was only up by 11. But even in the few days following, and to the extent these polls really do reflect shifts, if they can be if they're that granular in terms of their details that you can really buy them, you see the shift going from 50%, still enough, obviously, to get a majority of the vote against Haley, but she would be pretty happy, I guess, with 39%, now up to close to or over 60%, depending on the poll. So Trump probably walks away. I think if he gets 55, if he gets north of 55%, maybe if he even gets north of 50%, it's all over. Haley withdraws, and she endorses Trump. Now, my initial reaction to that is that's great news for Trump if that happens. That's bad news for Biden, because Trump will, of course, start making fun of Biden and, calling him Sleepy Joe. I don't know that he'll call him Genocide Joe, because Trump's policies, to the extent he's enunciated them for Israel, are even worse than Biden's. According to Brianna Joy Gray, though, this was interesting, Nathan Robinson, Trump hasn't been as bellicose in terms of his rhetoric with respect to Israel. He's basically just saying nothing, knowing that for now this is a very bad issue for Biden, that people will not vote for Biden because of his support for Israel, his complete, almost mitigated in any way support for Israel. And given that Trump has enunciated either similar or worse, he's smart to just lay low and let the pro-Palestine voters, such as myself, and the Palestinian voters, Muslim voters, anti-war voters, all wring our hands in disgust and dismay at what Joe Biden is doing. So Trump is smart to say nothing, I guess. I figure this is good for Trump. He wants to win, and he can start making fun of Joe right away, pivot. He won't have to spend money. He's been, by the way, raking in more cash. This is a change. In 2016 and 2020, the Democratic candidates and the ultimate nominees raised far more money than Trump did. There's a variety of reasons for that, but that was the way it was. Clearly demonstrating that wealthy voters, affluent donors, were very comfortable with both Hillary and Joe Biden. And of course, those are good reasons for you not to be. Trump has done well so far. It looks like his fundraising has picked up a bit. And I don't know, this may or may not help him with that. People just assume, well, you're going to win. The Republican primary will keep our money in our pockets for a while. Plus, he's rich. But my immediate reaction is the best thing for the Democrats is let the Republican primary go on for as long as it goes on. Apparently, that's not necessarily the case. There we go. Why is it doing that? I didn't want it to show you that, but yes, that's strange. Apparently, that is not. Before we get to that, just real quick, did you know? Yeah, I mentioned this. There is going to be a primary on the Democratic side this evening as well today, and results are expected around 7:15. Joe Biden is not on the ballot, and I'm not clear why not. Because Williamson and Dean Phillips are, and they're still running in South Carolina. Apparently, this is an unsanctioned primary. The DNC will not recognize these results. Whatever delegates are apportioned, whatever will not count at the Democratic National Convention this summer. By the way, where is it? Does anyone know? I don't know where that is. It's going to be, last time it was it Milwaukee? In 2020, I think it was Milwaukee. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Milwaukee. So these delegates, whoever wins them tonight, will not count. The DNC will not recognize them. And Joe Biden, I think, wanting to show respect for the process, which benefits him. I mean, the process was based on what would be best for Joe Biden to win as easily as possible in the Democratic primary. He didn't, he's not running officially, but there's a write-in campaign for him. And then Phillips and Marianne Williamson. Does this hurt Joe Biden? I don't think it matters, to be honest. I know there's a lot of talk, it's embarrassing for him. The news media is going to have to announce, Marianne Williamson won or Dean Phillips won. They're going to have to announce it. Maybe Joe Biden wins as a write-in, and then that's probably good for him. I don't think anyone cares about these shenanigans. I think it's frustrating as a progressive that the Democratic Party took the primary out of New Hampshire, the first in the nation primary out of New Hampshire. I think it's very frustrating because the South Carolina Democratic electorate is definitely more conservative. It's less open to real progressive policies. And it's also, unfortunately, more tractable. They will follow what Jim Clyburn tells them to do. And I think that's very, very unfortunate. That's the way it is. All right, let's get back to what the Democratic Party wants and whether that's good for democracy and good for Joe Biden. And I know people say, well, if Joe Biden wins or if Donald Trump wins, that's bad for democracy. So if that's your test, right? If your test is if Donald Trump wins, that's bad for democracy. If I said that wrong, I apologize. If that's your test, Donald Trump needs to lose for democracy to win. Then do you want Trump to win big? Many Democrats do. They feel that a Trump decisive victory in New Hampshire is good for Joe Biden. Yeah, I don't buy that. I don't agree with it. But let's get into why that is. Interesting argument here. Interesting position. The theory is that Trump is the weaker candidate against Biden, and Democrats and even independents are scared of Trump. They think they buy the demonization of Trump, that Trump is truly anti-democracy. That's the theory. That's what many feel, believe, and I certainly know that to be true based on my work in this area across the country. When I was a organizer, political organizer, this is for sure true. So, given that, is this going to help? Assuming that Biden wins big, will there be this sudden groundswell for him? And I don't think so. I'm not seeing that. You know why? Because people already know it's going to be Trump versus. And frankly, nobody really cares. We just don't. We're just like, we're over it. This is not a race that people won't care about or want to see either one win. To the extent that people care, especially on the Democratic side, it is true. It's true that people really are afraid of Donald Trump, and he's going to get people out. He's going to get people out, but he's going to get them out regardless. He'll get them out whether he takes the nomination tonight or he takes it in a month or 2 months. It really won't matter. So I think the Democrats are, to the extent they think this is going to help them, they're just grasping. A little more, this is also Jen Psaki, of course, from MSNBC, getting into this mix. And do you like the fact that Jen Psaki, who is just clearly a pure Biden shill, is an MSNBC reporter? I mean, does that or a host? Do you think that's good for democracy? I'm not. I don't believe so. I think that's wrong. You shouldn't just get to go from being the White House spokesperson to hosting your own show on MSNBC. She wants to do a podcast. She wants to go on YouTube. Fine. But having a cable news station, there's a limited number of cable news channels with your own show, I have a problem with it. Most undecided voters don't think Trump will be the Republican nominee. That's what the president's campaign internal data shows. Is that possible? Well, look, Arlen doesn't think Trump's going to be the nominee. He reads the polls, but he thinks that because of the criminal justice problems that Trump faces, he's not going to be the nominee. I don't know how you look at those poll numbers and come to any other conclusion, but it's going to be Trump. You even factor in the fact that in those two states, Maine and Colorado, where there were rulings that Trump might be blocked from the ballot, those rulings were put on hold and have been appealed. And every other state has held that Trump gets to be on the ballot. And then you factor in that his base doesn't care if he's convicted. How is he not going to be the nominee? He's going to be the nominee. Biden seems to think, or his team seems to think, that when these independents are suddenly confronted with the fact that it's going to be Trump, they're going to throw up their hands in dismay and say, oh, no, it can't be Trump. It can't be Trump. I'll have to support Joe Biden. Any blue will do. That's just wishful thinking. That's fantasy. That's miracle thinking. It's not going to happen. That's like believing that when you buy some nostrum from Marianne Williamson, you're suddenly going to feel better about yourself. That's what that is. It's wish fulfillment thinking. It's not real. It's just not real. People do all sorts of things that I don't understand. People vote for Donald Trump. I don't understand that. I kind of get it a little bit. It's not a good choice. People do things I really, really, really don't understand, like voting for Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. I totally don't understand that. People think RFK Jr. is on their side. I don't understand that. Lots of times people do things I don't understand. Another thing I really don't understand is the kind of brittle patriotism we've seen on display over and over and over. People, it's what the United States is doing. It must be okay. It's what, if you're Israeli, it's what Israel is doing. If you're Jewish, it's what Israel's doing. It's okay. I don't understand that. It's a way of thinking that is just so foreign to me. And I see it. It's not like I don't see it. I understand this is the case. People get very, very defensive if you criticize, their country, what have you, no matter how legitimate it might be. I remember when that Obama's preacher said that 9/11 was the chickens coming home to roost. And I was like, yeah, it was. And so many people were so offended by that. I don't get that. Two things can both be true. U.S. policy could have so angered and upset people that they were willing to, commit to a kamikaze raid where they flew planes into skyscrapers. That can be true. U.S. policy could be really, really bad and activate people to do something really awful like that. And at the same time, it doesn't make it okay to fly planes into buildings and kill innocent people. You can believe two things at once. I can believe that the Palestinians are completely oppressed and persecuted by Israel. That doesn't mean I believe it's okay for Hamas to kill 900 innocent people at a rock concert. But I kind of understand why they did, but it does make it okay. Stephen Decatur was a U.S. naval officer, explained this. He said, it's my country, right or wrong, or our country, talking about the United States, our country, right or wrong, whatever, we may be doing really, really, really bad things, but it's our country. And I get that, but I don't get that that means I support the country when we do bad things, my country when we do bad things. It doesn't mean I think it's okay that we tortured people at Abu Ghraib. So I don't get that. I understand it intellectually, but I don't get it. And we're seeing, Goering said this, the Nazi. And this is a famous quote, and I've shown it before, not on this live stream, but when I was in radio. The common people don't want war, but after all, it is the leaders of the country who determine policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or parliament, whatever. All you have to do is tell the people they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. And, I think Goering was pretty much correct. He was spot on. He nailed that correctly. And why wouldn't he have? I mean, he had fought in World War I, and then he was part of the Nazis who got the German people behind the absolutely disastrous World War II. So he understood, how it works. But I still am like, why? Why do we keep falling for it? And maybe it's just, you feel endangered. You want to be part of something. You want to be part of a group. And an identity, right? But that desire, that need to feel like you're part of something bigger can be great, but it can also be exploited, and often is, by the billionaire class, by weapons manufacturers, by people like Netanyahu, who should be out of office, but they exploit war to stay in office. It's a very, very dangerous dynamic that we put our country first in the sense that we set aside our morality, our notions of right or wrong to be behind a country when it does terrible, terrible things, including going to war. Israel was... Did Hamas attack Israel? It certainly, I view what Hamas did as a crime. Israel wants to say it was an attack. It was a war. I say it was a crime. I don't think war was declared on the United States by Al-Qaeda when they flew planes into, the World Trade Towers. I don't think that was a war being declared on us. It was a crime. And that's what Hamas committed, a crime. And Israel used that crime, just as the Nazis do the Reichstag fire, which they might or might not have set themselves, to seize power and round up a lot of political enemies. And the crime by Hamas, Israel is using, Netanyahu is using, to rally Israelis behind his policy. I thought this was a really interesting article, so I wanted to just show it, highlight it for you. Again, from the Washington Post. Washington Post suffering, cutting back a lot of workers. It is unfortunate. Bezos has lost a lot of money. He really has. I mean, the Post was a bad investment from a financial standpoint for him. Look, media is rough. I know better than anybody. They were ready to give up on Israel. Now they're all in. So, people who are kind of progressive, liberal, maybe kind of like me, who are Israeli or who lived in Israel, maybe they had moved to the United States, moved from the United States to Israel, are now, or were up until many of them until October 7, recent times, thinking about leaving Israel, going back to the United States, or leaving and moving to the United States. This is kind of mirrored a friend of mine who was Israeli but now lives in the United States, and very critical of the Netanyahu government, very critical of the theocracy there. But when the attack occurred, they became all in, very united with Israel and Israelis, and felt an incredible solidarity against the Palestinians. So it's not just a solidarity, okay, this is really bad, we have to figure something out, we have to solve this problem. Maybe if we stop persecuting and oppressing the Palestinians, we'll all be safer. That would be the response that is the response I had, but the response I would want people to have. But it seems like it wasn't. A big part of the response was we have to all be united against the Palestinians, against, Hamas is Palestine. And we have to take no quarter against them. Well, I don't agree with that. I think that's a terrible, terrible attitude, and it leads to the whole world being blind. But that's how so many people respond. And before the Hamas attack over the summer, Hannah Shapiro said she didn't want her sons to serve in the IDF. That it was an oppressive force, presumably. She didn't like what they were doing. She didn't like what the Israeli government was doing. Now, her concerns were more identity politics, women's rights, LGBTQ, but democracy also. Clearly, Israel not a democracy. Clearly, the Palestinians are second class, not citizens. And apparently the Shapiros didn't like that. And I give them credit for not liking that. I don't like it either. And they were definitely contemplating leaving Israel, moving on. Yeah, subscribe now. And why am I having problems with my little subscribe now button? That's irritating me to no end. The Hamas attack on October 7th unified Israel. Many, not 100%, but with 1,200 Israelis killed, maybe 900 of them civilians, a couple hundred plus kidnapped, the country rallied in support of the military and to fight Hamas. And it's really interesting, and yes, it's understood. It's understandable. I think it's most. What can I tell you? I think it's very, very, very unfortunate. I wish that the violent attack had caused Israel to reconsider, or caused Israelis to reconsider the policies vis-a-vis the Palestinians. But at least for the Shapiros, that's not what happened. Shapiro said, I feel more Israeli than ever. But I didn't need to be Israeli. I can just be a Jewish woman somewhere. Now I can't pretend I'm not part of these people. Well, okay, you have something in common with them, somewhat common ancestries, you're their co-religionists. It's what Goering said. She feels as though she was under attack. She personally was under attack on October 7th. And she must retaliate against those people who attacked her. They're the enemy. And not only the people who were directly responsible, of course, but the people who have the same religion as those people, or who were, living in the same region as those people, or the people who complained about Israel. Now suddenly, that's who she is connected. She's connected to those who view the Palestinians as the enemy. Yeah, I mean, this is the way people are. The one takeaway for me is Democrats need to give progressives need to give voters an enemy too. And that enemy should be the corporate elites. That enemy should be the billionaire class. That enemy should be the leaders of both parties. That enemy should not be voters who are torn between two very, very bad options. This quote really stood out for me. What Hannah Shapiro said. I was really, because so much of this is people just not thinking through or not wanting to think through what's really happening. So Hannah Shapiro now calls herself a Zionist. She says Jewish people in Israel are dying for Jewish people in the rest of the world to have a plan B one day. So the plan B, I guess, for me, is if things get too hot for Jews in the United States, I can go to Israel. And maybe that's what Shapiro thought when she emigrated from Paris, from France to Israel. France is anti-Semitic. I've got to get out of here. I would argue that to a significant degree, the actions of Jewish people in Israel are what could lead to pogroms against Jews elsewhere. That Israel, by insisting that it's the Jewish state, that any criticism of Israel itself is anti-Semitic, is turning people against all Jews. Now, do I think that's good? No, I don't. I wish that weren't the case. I wish people would look at everyone as an individual. Just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you support Israel. I'm Jewish. I don't support Israel. But this is the natural tendency. So Shapiro saying that Israel is the place, our safe harbor. But I would say Israel is the reason the rest of the world could indeed become an unsafe harbor, or certainly make it more likely that the rest of the world will become an unsafe harbor. And that just seems so clear to me. I just wonder why it's not clear to her. It's very unfortunate, but it isn't. It isn't clear to her. And who knows, maybe she's right and I'm wrong. Things always possible. The other thing Shapiro gets really wrong here is when she talks about Jewish people in Israel dying. Jewish people in Israel are not dying. Jewish people in Israel were killed, it is true, on October 7th. But the dying and killing is mostly happening outside of Israel, in Gaza, in the West Bank. And it's the result of what Israel is doing. Israelis are not dying. Israelis are killing. Now, here's a headline that you could say, well, it disproves what I just said. 24 Israeli soldiers killed, and this is yesterday, in deadliest day for IDF and Gaza offensive. So, wait a second. What are you talking about, Hal? Look at all those 24 killed. Now, first of all, again, they didn't die in Israel. They died in Gaza. Okay? So that's part one. Part two, they did die because of what Israel's doing, not because of Hamas. And reading that story closely, you realize just how complicit, how responsible Israel is for the deaths of its own soldiers, not in Israel. So again, it isn't Jewish people in Israel dying so that Jews will have a plan B. Not at all. They're killing in Gaza. So I started reading the story. Hamas militants fired a rocket-propelled grenade at an Israeli military mission. The Israeli military mission was preparing to demolish 2 Gaza buildings. Right? They're in Gaza. They're destroying it. Basically an occupied area anyway. And the explosion then killed 21 reserve soldiers. The rocket grenade catalyzed the explosion. It wasn't the grenade that killed the 21 reserve soldiers. It was explosives that Israel had already planted and was planning to detonate, but had not yet detonated because it wanted to get its own people out, its own soldiers out who had been inside that building. So it was actually Israeli weapons that created the explosion, Israeli explosives that created the explosion that led to directly to 21 people dying. I fear, though, that no matter how rational, how much I explain things, how much the data proves the inherent wrongness of the pro-Israel position and of Israel, it doesn't matter. It's my country, right or wrong. I want to get to one more quick story it's a local story. You know, when I started doing this live stream, by the way, I would love, I've been getting I mentioned this, a lot more hits. My video's getting, my numbers are definitely going up. My Friday free-for-all was one of my most popular ever. I was very happy about that. Got a lot of comments too, which was nice. I don't get as many comments. I love to see the comments because then I know people are watching. I saw some weird comments, like somebody who was like a huge Trump supporter, very critical of what I had said, and I was surprised because that was the Latinos for Trump discussion, and I was like, well, I sort of was less unpro-Trump than most people are, most lefties are, and I tried to explain why I thought Trump was getting support from Latinos without demonizing anybody in particular, but apparently that didn't go over so well in some circles, at least the pro-Trump circles. So one of the goals of this live stream was also to talk about local stuff, because there just isn't a lot. It doesn't get as much attention as it should. This is a big story here in Montgomery County, Maryland. The school system, the school district is very highly regarded. People move to Montgomery County just because of the schools, and especially certain schools in the county are especially well regarded. And so Manifa McKnight, I guess, deciding to, kind of take the matter into her own hands, having been told by the school board that she was very possibly, they were asking her to step down, or they hoped she would step down, rather than taking that quietly and lawyering up. Maybe she spoke to somebody who, crisis management team or something, said, oh no, go to the Washington Post, write an article, tell them, or tell a Washington Post reporter how you're being unfairly targeted. And so that's exactly what she did. And kind of laying the groundwork clearly for a lawsuit for wrongful termination if she in fact is terminated. So what McKnight says is, and it's masterful, and I think this really shows you how wrong our system is, how unfair it is, how it treats people who are highly paid, who have advantages, so much better than everyone else, and why this makes everyone so angry and why it's so costly. So McKnight finds I'm sure this was written by her lawyer, and this is what she says. The school board has never written, documented, or communicated any concern about my performance, and has consistently affirmed that I've met expectations. So for these reasons, I'm concerned that its actions, which is telling her to step down, are based on something other than my performance, which would constitute a violation of my contract. Now, the article makes clear, and every time Manifa McKnight is mentioned, she's praised as the first Black woman to run Montgomery County, Maryland Public Schools. There was a Black man some time ago, he had a pretty uneventful, I don't even remember the guy's name, but he was, just another in a long line of administrators where there wasn't much excitement during his term. But with McKnight, there's been a lot of excitement. And I know a lot of teachers feel that she doesn't support them. The board, which is more conservative now, clearly wanted somebody who was going to stand up to the teachers' union, and McKnight has done that. So there's, pushed back hard against calls for more teachers, for smaller class sizes. McKnight has done all that. She's done what the conservative school board has wanted. And I'm not surprised she met expectations, because that was what their expectations were of her. She would side with management. She would over the students and the teachers. Although meeting expectations is nothing special. Aren't you supposed to consistently exceed expectations? And maybe she did. I don't know, according to the board. But what she's saying is, there must be some other reason. And what would that reason be? Well, she's a black woman. She's being treated unfairly, it seems to me, is what she's laying the groundwork for. And if you're a lawyer, that's great, because you get to sue for civil rights discrimination, Title I, or no, I can't remember what the title was of the U.S. Code. I used to defend those lawsuits when the D.C. government was accused of unfair, wrongful termination. So she's clearly setting the table for some sort of a wrongful termination lawsuit, possibly based on her being a member of a protected class. But it's all BS. It's all bull. She knows very well why she is being asked to step down. There was a huge scandal. She recommended for promotion a principal who had had dozens of allegations against him of sexual harassment, including against students. Not that he actually had made sexual advances to students, but using terms like slut and others to describe girls as young as 8th graders. And this had been documented for a decade, that this guy was a bad apple and was getting away with it. And in fact, he was recommended for a promotion, and she was supporting his promotion. And that's why she's in trouble. This is costing the county a ton of money, and it's a huge black eye. And it should be a black eye. The board itself is not above reproach either. The board had been notified by the union, and the board still supported the superintendent, who was also supporting the sexual harasser. It was only when the Washington Post reported that finally some changes were called for, and the principal, the sexual harassing principal, who I think was going to be promoted to like an administrative, a deputy superintendent. That was the plan. It wasn't until the Washington Post reported all the sexual harassment charges and documented them that finally action was taken. So of course she looks bad. And of course her actions were not acceptable as the leader of the school district. She's making a lot of money, $320,000 a year. Just want to touch on that for a moment. I understand CEOs are making There are CEOs making $10 million, $20 million a year, 30, 60 times what she's making. That's even wronger. But this is too much money. I said to my wife, teachers are making a little over $100,000 if they have a lot of 20-year vets, right? You could find somebody who would really, really, really want this job, who cares about the students, who isn't doing it for the money, for I think north of $200,000. I know Montgomery County is very expensive. I don't deny it. And that wouldn't seem like so much money. Not to someone who's in a law firm, it would seem like not much money. But for most people, it's a lot of money. For teachers, it's a lot of money. You could find somebody who wanted the job because they wanted to educate. They wanted to work with great teachers. I think when you raise salaries to astronomical levels, and by the way, that base salary, there's all sorts of incentives and bonuses. I think it was closer to $400 in the end. But when you raise salaries to levels like this, you attract people who are attracted by money. who want to do it for money, not because they care about kids, not because they care about education. The entire system we live in is screwed up. There's no center. There's no middle. You're either at the top or the bottom. You're either making a ton of money, and then your concern is yourself. Of course, she's going to lawyer up. Of course, she's going to get some attorney and some crisis management team to defend her and represent her because she wants that $320K. And she's probably thinking, hey, I file a lawsuit, they're going to settle. They're going to settle. And there's a lot of skeletons in the board's closet too. But for her to claim, oh, I don't know why would they want to get rid of me? It's just so absurd. As Alexandra Robbins wrote here in MoCo 360, this private law firm that Manifa McKnight handpicked to investigate, that the county paid several $100,000 to, ultimately concluded that she knew about this guy, that she knew he was a bad apple. She knew that dozens of teachers, students, parents, other administrators were reporting him, Beetleman is his name, as a problem, as a sexual predator. And she still recommended him for promotion. She ignored all of that. Her name was redacted, unsurprisingly, because she picked a law firm that did the investigation. But Robbins, doing her due diligence, was able to conclude, no, she knew. She didn't care. Didn't matter. Fine, we'll make him deputy superintendent. Now she said that she would do everything possible to hold him responsible. But the fact of the matter was that she did nothing. She says the issue came to our attention this summer, but the Inspector General's report showed she knew long before the summer. It was only when the Washington Post published its report over the summer she did anything. That's not what you want in the leader of your school system. All right, that's going to do it for me. I'll see you tomorrow. Definitely tune in, share, like, subscribe. Have a great day.